Ever wondered how your favorite clothing brands actually work behind the scenes? How are clothes even designed and made? Make the Dot co-founders Emilie and Theren talk with designers behind the most well-known brands and design institutions to get to know the humans behind the garments. Tune in to go deep with topics covering hopes, dreams, creativity, and work nightmares.
Welcome to Makers of Fashion, where we unveil the stories and the humans behind your favorite clothing brands. I'm your host, Theren, and this episode is brought to you by Make the Dot, a collaborative canvas for fashion designers. Make the Dot helps you save 5 hours a week by streamlining your concept development process, giving you more time to be creative. Click on the link in the description to learn more. Now let's get back to the show. Today we have a special guest who's been one of the most extensive leadership journeys we know of. Welcome, Jonathan de Lagarde. Jonathan cut his teeth as a designer at Gap in the noughties before moving to one of my favorite places in the world, Hong Kong, to become a design director at Nike. He then moved back to the US to run his own brand, De Lagarde, stocked at Barney's and Harvey Nicks. Following this, Jonathan landed creative roles in Wilson and Fila before moving to Italy to become the CD for Diodora. And he's most recently run the Goodman and Lita brands for Ciara. Yep, that's Ciara. So, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
With a CV like that, I'm not really quite sure where to begin, to be honest.
Yeah.
We could sit and talk for hours. So I'm going to start with the easy stuff.
Okay.
What made you get into fashion? What inspired you to start your journey in the fashion industry?
Right. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I think it was just honestly growing up in New York, and not the peer pressure, but the idea of having to, there's so many style influences growing up in New York, and just keeping track with that and wanting to be a part of that, and wanting to also express my own style in terms of how I like to dress and what influences I brought from different places. I remember just always wanting to be different. I always wanted to do what I wanted to do and not what everyone else wanted to do. And I think that's such an interesting and palpable part of the culture there in terms of how you express yourself, how you express fashion. And so, I played sports in high school, and I thought that was going to be a path, but I clearly recognized that wasn't going to be a thing. So I always, wanted to be a designer. I always wanted to be an artist, and I just did whatever I could to get on that path. I got a scholarship to NYU, a academic scholarship, and they don't have a fashion program. So I had to do some hustling to kind of get myself in the door, to get my knowledge up. I could always draw, I could always sketch, I always had an aesthetic point of view, but I wanted to make sure that I had the technical point of view as well. So, my sister went to FIT. She's in the fashion industry as well. Okay. She works for Kate Spade. So I would sneak into the library there and just devour everything I could. Nice. And that kind of was part of my journey in terms of hustling and self-education and learning everything I could about the industry. I started my own t-shirt brands, living in New York, and peddled them at all these stores around Manhattan, and just tried to build up a profile and build up a community as much as possible. And, I had some really bad jobs at first. And then at least myself, I consider my journey to have started when I got to the Gap. It's been a lot of hustling and just, I know it sounds cliche, but not giving up. I mean, that was my dream, and I still dream about it every day, about what the next paths are, what the next goals are. So just not giving up. And that's kind of how I started my journey.
Yeah. Do you reckon your, cause you've obviously worked in a lot of athletic brands, sportswear brands. Do you reckon that athletic path, from growing up and playing sports and stuff, that's naturally why you've gone down more of that route than the more classic fashion?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that I think there's a couple answers to that. There's more I think the intersection of sport and fashion is a really powerful one here, especially in this country. There's a culture around that, especially when around fashion and basketball, and you think about like the way Jordans, the sneaker, have just infiltrated fashion. We all know that. So I think it was just like a natural progression for me. From being at the Gap, I could have, maybe chosen to go to, J. Crew or something else, or Abercrombie and Fitch when I was there. But, when Nike came calling, I think that was probably, I couldn't pass that up, because that was such an iconic brand for me, just growing up, and what it represented and what it could do, what it did to validate my journey, which is important in the biz. I couldn't, let that go. So I think it was just, my love of sport, and how I infused it within fashion, and how the two kind of coexist. I think that's what made it a natural fit.
And I think like that's such a good point, because I was thinking about this the other day, like how I personally, I'm a big sports fan as well. Yeah. And like my kind of love for like Nike in particular came from like football, right? Yeah. And like that journey, and then like the adverts like back when I was a kid, and like the Euros have just been going on, and like how that like kind of, so now it's like football like cultures like kind of merged into like day to day with like old school football shirts and stuff like that. Yeah. And basketball in the 90s was very similar. Yeah. And it's been interesting this journey of like how sport has influenced fashion for the past 40 years and continues to do so today. Like we all wear like running sneakers now from like the Cortezes from the Nikes back in the 70s, right? And they're like now iconic. And then you've got the Stan Smiths and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's like an intersection that's not really talked about in the fashion industry too much, but it's like so important. And it's like, it's just like really, really cool. It influences like pop culture. So more than we think.
Well, you see the progression, especially when it comes to sport, fashion, and music. Like in the 80s, Run DMC, the Adidas tracksuit, the Adidas, sneakers unlaced, and how that created like the zeitgeist. It was just like, it just influenced so many people. You see how in, for instance, like in the UK, Fred Perry, or, the tracksuit culture, and just how it related back to your team, how you presented yourself as a supporter. And then you take a next step from that, and how, supporters use Stone Island as a representation of like, exactly how they dress. So, there's so many different ways to kind of like, understand the nuance between sport, fashion, music, and how they all intersect. And it's just seamless.
No, spot on. It's like segueing into the brands that you've worked at. Mm-hmm. How did you end up, like, because your career is so varied, and you spent time in the US, you spent time in Italy, Hong Kong. Like, how have you, like, talk us a little bit through that, like, that journey around the world, and like how that kind of came about?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that. I always wanted to have a diverse experience set, a diverse background set. I didn't want to be, there's some the people in the industry who are, just sweater designers and just footwear designers, and that's great. But I wanted to experience all of the levels of the industry in different locales, different categories, different price points, because I just felt personally that's the way you become a well-rounded designer, or well-rounded builder of brands. And I wanted to be able to have that answer for a myriad of challenges, because that's, as a designer, that's your job. You're here to solve solutions or to bring solutions. I think before I got the job in Hong Kong, I was like, I'm staying in New York. I'm going to run this city. Like, I'm going to do this, and that. Like, I had it all planned out. And the Hong Kong thing was more of like a happy surprise, because it just clicked when the opportunity presented itself, and the head recruiter there came to me with it, and I was like, let's take a look at this. I flew there. They flew me out there on Thanksgiving Day for like a 24-hour turnaround and interview. and then I got it that next week. And I remember flying into Hong Kong, and just seeing how the city looked, and just the denseness of it, and just, the way the skyline is juxtaposed against like the peak and the mountainside. I was like, this is like Blade Runner. This is incredible. Like, this is insane. Like, I love it. And so it just experiencing that, really gave me that inspiration to want to travel more, to want to be in these different locales, and to have these different experiences, because it benefited me not only professionally, but personally. So, and with Italy, like, actually for the Diodora position, that was remote, but I would have to, so I was in Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles for a while. But I would travel to Italy a lot, specifically Florence, in the Prato area. So being able to experience that at multiple points during my career was really eye-opening experience. It was really eye-opening, because you see how, especially in Prato, just it's this rich cultural tradition of, apparel making, bag making, all of that. And then you have this influx of, like, Prato is essentially has one of the biggest populations of Chinese workers outside of, certain parts of China right now. And you see, like, how the two cultures are colliding, and how that creates, interesting work and interesting challenges. So being able to see that as well, up close, it's really interesting. So I think just getting that first taste of living overseas, I've traveled overseas before that, but just living there, it made me realize that, as much as I love New York, I'm a New Yorker, there's more to it. There's more to see, and there's more to experience.
How did it differ being a leader in these different brands and countries? Because like you say, like, an American brand is very different to a rich, like, kind of institution in Italy. It's kind of different to, like, somewhere like, Hong Kong, it's still Nike, but leading in Asia and running a team in Asia is very different to running a team in the US. So how did you kind of trick and, like, go through these different nuances? And Italy is very political and very, like, traditional, for want of a better phrase. Hong Kong is in a different way. It's more about face and, like, managing, like, more softer way. America's a bit more blunt. So how did you, like, go about managing these, like, and leading teams in these very different, very famous, like, well-established institutions, and still got stuff done while, like, working within these different challenges?
I think, it takes a little bit of time to just establish that trust that you're coming in with possibly a new mindset, a new method of creating, a new method of, especially when if we're talking specifically about working and living in Hong Kong, a new method of collaborating, in Hong Kong, and then ostensibly, in Asia, but specifically China, there's a very, like, top down, direct way of leadership. It is the leader leads, and then, any type of, like, opinions from junior employees is, kind of seen as dissent. Even if that opinion is rock solid and helps, right? It's just, and that goes to the idea of also what you just said about saving face. You can't challenge, ideas. And if you do want to challenge, you have to take them to the side. You have to speak quietly. You have to kind of, like, really politically, and use nuance to kind of get that across. Whereas in the States, there's collaboration, but there's also, like, a bit more of in some cases, a blunt, more direct thing. And that's sometimes rewarded when you're like, no, I've got a better idea, and challenging the status quo. So when I got to Nike, I noticed that Nike in Hong Kong, and then I just really worked with the team to, from the start, for instance, when we started a concept for the season, really getting the entire team together and telling them the concept and wanting their feedback for it.
Yeah.
I needed my tech designer to understand, hey, this is the concept of the season. What are your thoughts on what can be executed and what can't be executed, because you have all this experience? And I want you to tell me, like, I'm going to give you all the learnings I have, but I want to learn from you as well. And I think that was kind of a new way for them to work. Okay. Whereas before they were just like, here, do this, take care of that. And I think there was a lot of people in the office at that time, because it was a healthy mix of like, expats and then just native-born Hong Kongers that were there. So being able to just help the team really create in a different way where it's more collaborative, where, I definitely want to set the tone. But once that tone is set, like, let's all collaborate and think about ways to make that concept even better, so that it keeps its integrity all the way to the consumer. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest examples of just how do I crack this problem of just, leadership and in a different country, designing product for different countries within the Asia Pacific region, not just China, but Japan and Korea, and taking into account all of their cultural nuances. And it's really that one common theme, like, understanding how they've worked before with that top-down leadership and saving face, and then, slowly, giving my perspective and working around that and making this kind of like hybrid perspective on how to lead and how to be collaborative.
Which out of the different roles in the different countries, which did you find the most rewarding and challenging, and why?
I think, well, I'll give two answers to that. Like, with the Nike role, I think it was the most rewarding because it was thousands of miles away from what I'm used to. So it was a challenge to myself, and it allowed me to just exercise a muscle that I think a lot of people don't really want to do, and that's the embracing the unknown. I didn't know anybody there. I had no kind of framework of what it was going to be, other than it's this brand and I have to do this, like, this is my job. So being able to overcome that challenge and just take that on, I think that changed me a lot personally and professionally. And just being able to use that as a launching pad to go to all these other countries in Asia. Like, I mean, going to Japan and going to Tokyo was like here in the States, like flying down to, Miami, or going to, you can do that on like kind of like a weekend trip or something like that, because it's so close. So that was really interesting in that way. Working with Diadora and working with that team, and really them asking me to push the envelope so far, because they had this robust footwear culture. They were doing all these collaborations with, like, it's like the purple sneaker with Wu-Tang Clan and or Raekwon and like all this other stuff. Yeah. But the apparel just wasn't. It didn't have that same energy. So them just saying, like, hey, we want you to go all the way to the left and really take us to a place that we haven't been before. That was really incredible for me, because it allowed me to just deliver and work on concepts that I've wanted to do for a while, but a lot of brands just were either too, it just was too conceptual. So being able to do that and to reinvigorate their ethos, their design language, that was an amazing experience.
Do you have any stories from that time or from either of those roles that, like, you could share with us, like pre-Watershed, pre-beer? Like any fun tales from Asia or Europe that you could share?
So I do remember when the first week I moved to Hong Kong, my luggage and all my stuff was delayed, and I didn't have anything. And I love Nike. I had a bunch of other sneakers as well. So all I had in my luggage were some Pumas. I don't know why I had, like, there was some Puma, like, high tops. They were just like this I remember they had this line. It was this like vintage Puma line where they went back into the archives and did these like really cool sneakers, and it was called Dassler. So it was like just it was dope. But I walked into the office with these Pumas, and I was set to meet with my creative director. Great guy. His name is Richard Elder. And he's like, "Hey, come to the office for a second." And he's laughing. He's like, "Listen, I know, like, it's your first day. You cannot come in here wearing Pumas. If you did that in Portland, they'd probably fire you on the spot." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I know." Like, so, and I remember just the first day being like, how is this happening? How is this happening? So that was crazy. And I remember just telling my friends, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening. So luckily, like, all my stuff, and I just remember, like, after that, like, my employee discount I was going crazy, just buying every Nike like sneaker I could. So that was a crazy story. Another kind of ongoing story from Nike is just at that time was just having to deliver multiple collections from multiple countries, and the stress and the challenge and just the sometimes the language barriers and just so that was crazy to have to go from a country meeting with Japan and to Korea, and then have to synthesize all of these needs and still keep the collection cohesive across the board. So that was really interesting. Wow, like, traveling in Italy, I think again, like, and you see a lot of it right now. It's bubbling up again in the press and just in kind of like the you see it on TikTok and Instagram. You see some factories, and just you see the luxury brands that are being worked on in these factories, and you're privy to like the prices just working there. And I'm not going to name names and but you see like how inexpensive it is to make some of these things, and so it's eye opening. I always knew it. But it is eye-opening, and to be able to see, like, in the middle of Prado, huge Chinese factories there, and it's jarring to see that, to see like one huge neighborhood and it's all Chinese folks, and it's crazy. It's a very jarring thing. So I think like those really stand out. My first trip abroad was with Gap to Korea, and visiting the factories there, and that was eye-opening as well, to see just factories that have actual like dorms and just living quarters for everyone there, and just the scale and the size of these factories. And then as I got through my career, I was like, okay, this is just normal. This is just the cost of doing business.
So you've been a leader, many different brands, done your fair share of hiring, team building, maybe some firing. How do you go about like building a team? Like, what is there any values or frameworks you looked for? Do you look for certain things in people? Are you a bit more flexible? Like, how do you even like go about that process?
The first thing I look for is entrepreneurship. I want to see that the people that I'm hiring are self-starters, that have a really strong sense of curiosity, a strong sense of just, hey, if I don't know it, I will figure it out and I will make it happen. Not only because that's how I've kind of come about in the industry and have learned and overcome, whatever challenges in front of me, but I think in such a fast-paced environment that we are in now, you want to be able, I love teaching. I love imparting what I've learned, but there also has to be a sense of just, entrepreneurship on their end in terms of being self-starter, learning fast, adjusting to just some really tight deadlines, because calendars, even calendars that are, 12 months, 24 months, there are still a lot of pressure points within that. But that's what I look for a lot. Are you entrepreneurial? Do you have, can you handle things on your own? And can you understand direction and then distill it and come back to me with hopefully better options than I gave you, because that's what I'm looking for. And then I think a sense of just, being able to give and communicate ideas really well. That's so key in this industry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I think designers especially have to master the ability to present confidently, and to marry the sense of, here's why I chose this concept or design aesthetically, but here's how it marries to the business perspective. So if they're able to do that, and to build upon that, I think they can have some really good success. And I want that on my team.
We hear a lot about teams are burnt out, like under pressure to produce a lot of designs in a short period of time, tight deadlines, all the fun stuff, right? How do you as a leader protect your team and ensure that, not so much protect your team, but put the guardrails in place that they could do their job to the best of the company's, of their abilities, they could deliver, and product was still created while they could still have like I wouldn't say an enjoyable life, but they could perform without being burnt out, right?
Right.
How did you even go about managing that as a leader?
Yeah. Well, I think, firstly, it comes that ability to have a kind of seamless development process. Yeah. A large part of that starts with me in terms of how, if I'm creative directing a brand, design directing a brand, starting the concept, giving the team the Bible, so to speak, for the season, creating the guardrails, the design language, everything, giving them everything they need to just get up and go. Yeah. So where they don't have to figure out what are we doing? What are the aesthetic parameters here? How can I expand upon this? And then a big part is just after that, when it comes down to crunch time and actually having the time to design. So I'm a big proponent of really linking with all my partners on different, whether it's tech design and sourcing and, everybody, and letting them know hey, this time period, there's no meetings. I need this so my team can build, so I can build. Because if we don't have this time, then you're not going to get what you need. And it's not going to be of high quality if you keep pushing meetings down our throat, just really simple, day-to-day stuff. So being able to black out time periods for design, to understand that, a creative's work methods can vary. And really being okay with okay, just, if you can get this done in this way, if you need to be in this space to do that or that, that's cool. We just need to have it by this time, and being flexible in that way. I think that goes a long way to getting the really beautiful product that you're looking for, and just not micromanaging. That is just the mood killer, and it just kills any sort of just joy and happiness in the creative process. I've experienced it on my end. I know how it feels. So being able to trust in your designers and show trust in your creatives and show them that you trust them, while giving them enough guidelines to make them successful. I mean, that's a delicate balancing act, but if you can master that and really get that going, you'll get what you need, and it'll be beautiful.
Okay. What advice do you normally give your teams to keep them productive and keep them healthy while keep them performing?
I think to be fair to themselves, to really, we're doing a job. We have goals. We have creative goals, business goals, and this is our you know, our livelihood, but like, don't take it too seriously. Like, this is fashion. This is supposed to be like a really enjoyable pursuit.
Yeah.
We are trying to deliver we're trying to get our people to have an emotional reaction to something we're creating. So we are sort of entertainers in that same way as well. So I think just giving them perspective really helps a lot. I think it takes a lot of the tension and pressure off of everything. And I think also just telling them, like, you know, take a step back from looking at all fashion all the time. You know, it's just so many times we get look at inspiration from the same sources, the same, you know, things that everyone else is looking at. I'm a big advocate of going to museums and just or just being out in nature and just like actually clearing your mind and stop taking in the influx of just all the stimuli, because, you know, we're all like looking on this and looking at like the next fashion show, the runway show, and you know, and someone's telling you all the time, here's the next trend or something like that. So being able to disassociate yourself from that and to really come up and incept unique ideas just from being and just from looking at something that is so totally outside of the realm of what you look at every day. I think that definitely helps. It's like a palate cleanser for the mind. It's a palate cleanser for your inspiration.
So you've done a lot of different things, a lot of different brands. You've had your own brand. Bit of an open-ended question, but how does it differ working for a celebrity brand, some of the most established brands in the world, running your own brand? Like, what's the major like differences between the three?
I think it's just the variation in responsibility.
Okay.
That's the first thing that comes to my mind. You know, when I was doing my brand that I was partnering with a couple other people on, Guard.
Yeah.
You know, there's no like the aesthetic. You know, I had them to bounce off, like, you know, okay, what do you guys think about this design or this concept? But, you know, it's kind of like the aesthetic direction, you know, ultimately it comes from me.
Yeah.
So, you know, trusting in that, really learning to just almost be like, you know, let's give it a shot. Let's do this. Like, you know, there's no other really, you know, person out there to say like, well, what do you think about this and all that? Or to like kind of say like, well, you know, there's no level above me. Like the buck stops with me in a sense. So, but I love that. You know, I wanted to take that chance of myself, and you know, coming from Nike to what I was doing with Guard, it was a completely different thing. It was just really high-end design, you know, that was in a different category. So, but I love that about that. So I think that type of responsibility, and then, you know, when you're working with celebrities like Ciara and then like Russell Wilson, being able to give them information in a way that they can understand easily, taking their feedback, but also kind of giving your perspective based on your experience and based on the calendar as well, in terms of like, hey, I would love to do that, but we're at this date. So can we push it? You know, so it's kind of like the responsibility to be like a little bit more nuanced, and then in like given push and take or give and pull or push and pull with, you know, what they want to do. And then with the bigger brands, it's just, you know, working with cross-functional teams and knowing that, hey, you might not be even at a senior level, you might not be developing the color palette for the season. Like there's a whole other department that's doing that, which is good in some cases, because if you maneuver it well, then you have like a really good work-life balance picture. You're not doing everything. Like at some of these, for, you know, Ciara and Russell Wilson, I was doing the color palette, you know, the materials palette. And then when it came down to the photo shoot, I was art directing the photo shoot, doing the creative direction for that, choosing models, that all that sort of thing, in collaboration with, like, you know, and art directors that came on board. At Nike, that's pretty much, you're never gonna, you know, get to that point unless you're on like the art direction team or something like that. So you know, and I think it's just that goes to my earlier point, and I think every designer, that would be my advice, really try to get these diverse experiences. If you to do something entrepreneurial, to start your own brand, it really, you know, it flexes and it exercises certain muscles that you won't do if you're at Adidas for 20 years, you know. So it'll just give you a different perspective, and it actually, I think it helps you when you get into bigger brands, because you're just, you know, it's kind of like if you're running with a weight vest and you take off the weight vest, and then it's easier to run now. Like, I think that's the easiest, you know, kind of analogy.
Because you've got experience across the different parts of the throw, right? And parts of the flow. How's the pressures between the three different silos, the three different brands? Like, how do they differ?
The pressures. I think the pressure of doing your own brand is that you have a finite budget. So you've got to make it work. And if you do make mistakes, it's just kind of like, you know, it could be the end of your brand, in that sense. You know, with Guard, I realized, and I think we all realized, we were pricing things too high, and that kept us from just reaching a certain demographic, especially at a starting brand. We just, you know, even though the quality was amazing, we were making stuff in Italy, and it was just, we were getting all this press. I think we didn't have the permission yet to price things at the price point we were doing, compared to some of the luxury brands. So, you know, that was some learnings that we had to do on the fly. So that was a little bit of pressure there, to kind of have to rejigger and create more of a core, rather than everything being just like top end, high end type of pieces. You know, I think the biggest pressure though with all three is just, how do you stay on calendar? How do you stay creative enough while still hitting these dates? And, you know, like I said earlier, you could have a 12-month calendar, 24-month. I've had 8-month calendars. I've had 3-month calendars. And in each time span, there's always going to be something that threatens your gate, like your dates and gates. So, and I think that just comes down to, like, you know, the part as you move up in the industry and you start to get that director title, you know, how do you manage time? How do you make sure and advocate for your team's time? And that's a pressure on its own, because you're now, you know, you're telling people, like, I can't do that because I don't want to do that, or we can't do that because that's going to impede on the product. And, you know, so a lot of people still don't know how designers do what they do, or creatives do what they do. So they're just like, well, this is the date, why can't you hit that? But there's all these other, like, factors involved. So I think that's a very unique pressure in the biz.
Yeah, and also I think, how did you, like, because you're the subject matter expert in all these three different brands, right? Different roles. For me personally, what I would find frustrating would be in a role where I'm the subject matter expert and it's not really understood too much, not so much what I do, but okay, let's say, for example, when you're dealing with a celebrity brand, how I imagine it is, they've got their own ideas, they've got their own vision, they are experts in their own field, and they've got to their success because of that, like, determination and that mindset, right? That doesn't go away. So then taking that into, like, a brand where you're the expert and you're then gonna turn their vision into actually a really beautiful piece of clothing. How did you, like, manage that in, like, that perspective, and how did it compare to, like, let's say a Nike, where you're more of a guardian, more of a gatekeeper, or somebody who's keeping the innovating, of course, but you're keeping that 80-year-old, 60-year-old message alive. And then on the complete other side, you've got your own brand, it's your own vision. You're working with your different pressures, your budgeting.
Yeah.
How did you like marry those three while still in the end coming up with something beautiful and cohesive?
Yeah, I think it's just even with my own brand, sometimes you have to divest yourself of your ego, and to really work for the greater good, and that's the brand. And because there were with Gar, there were ideas that I wanted to do, but some of my partners were like, well, like let's try this other thing that we think might be a little bit better. And after time, I would realize, okay, maybe they're right. We should go this way. We need more, T-shirts or something like that. So I think like really getting that, and it's with everything else, you really have to divest yourself of your ego, because it's not Nike by Jonathan de Lagarde. It's Nike, with Sierra, it's Sierra. So I think with the thing that helps is that, so Sierra, for instance, her style has been rock solid since she came in. She's tomboy chic. She marries this kind of like baggy tomboy aesthetic with like high-end flourishes. And then it's the cherry on top is just like the dancing and like how she expresses herself. So taking that as the baseline, and then introducing to her like, hey, what about this, using this material that maybe you're not used to here? What about this idea? And then just kind of building that world around that helps a lot, because she already has like the cheat code and that's her style. At Nike, it was just within the parameters they gave for the season, or the concept for the season that we came up with. Like, how do you innovate to a way where you're giving either the athlete or the athlete inspired or the sport inspired person, giving them something new that they didn't think they needed. It's kind of like the iPod situation. Like, no one knew they needed an iPod until the iPod came. So like coming up with that's like a big thing at Nike.
Okay. Because I just like, I hear there's like Nike's obviously getting a lot of like flack at the moment. And like in my personal opinion, I don't think that's fair in the slightest. Like the reason the results aren't great is because like they betted heavily on D2C, and the world kind of
inventory,
the world kind of moved differently. So I mean that's not a product problem. But I think for Nike, it's always been, from me knowing what Nike is to today, it's always been insanely innovative. And as you say, it's always been, I didn't know I needed an iPod until I had an iPod. Like I run, and then I saw the Alpha Flies, and I'm like, I didn't know I needed these. I put them on, and I'm just like, this is wild. Like I'm like literally running on air, right? And it's been like that with every single products that they've done, like every single like sport, the same with the football boots and everything. And I think that, like you say, like that ethos and kind of going, we're not building faster horses, we're building a car, always trying to be like one step ahead of.
Right.
How did you, like, kind of a little bit of a segue, but how did you even go about that process? Like, how would you even go about thinking, I'm not trying to solve a problem for today. I'm trying to solve a problem that's a consumer never knew they even needed.
I went about it in a sense that I wanted to always push the envelope. I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing, and a great example of that, at Nike, China, Beijing specifically, basketball crazy, right? A lot of the especially in the high schools, a lot of the basketball courts were outside courts, because there were so many kids at these schools. So they have these like huge like multi-court like facilities, but they were mostly outside at the time. So Beijing, the Beijing team or the China team, Nike China, they were like, hey, we need something so these kids can play basketball outside, but
Oh,
it has to be warm and it can't just be like a jacket. Like it has to be like cool. We want something to be like
okay.
fresh. So, you know, I created this jacket where it was just super futuristic. It had, you know, asymmetrical zippers. It had pleating in the elbow, and it was filled with this new fill at the time that was like lightweight but retained your heat in a different way, and just used all the top tier materials to kind of, you know, synthesize into this piece that no one knew they needed until they saw it. And it was articulated enough where you could be in this like filled warm coat, but do all the moves like crossover, whatever you needed to do while playing outside. And it became this like really like big hit in China. And it looked futuristic. It looked like it was unlike anything that was on the market. So, you know, that's the kind of, I think, things that I gravitate towards, like, you know, giving like there's something about giving them something that feels familiar to them, whether it's like, hey, this is for basketball, and here are the things that make you feel more comfortable playing basketball outside. And so that's the adaptability part, or the adoptability part. Like they can adopt this because it feels familiar, but then giving them those degrees of design in there that push the envelope and make them feel like emotionally attached and like curious about why this looks the way it looks. So I think there's just like this combination of just giving them something that they can adopt or adapt into their everyday, then pushing it a little bit forward, and giving them those details, those iconic details that make them feel like they have something new, unique, and like they're the first to have it in a sense.
Do you reckon it's interesting that you should say that, because we were talking to one of the old CDs at Tommy Hilfiger, and she mentioned her proudest moment is there was this jeans pocket that she designed many years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still like you go into a Tommy shop and it's still that same shape. She's like, it still brings a little smile to her face, like 20 years later.
Yeah.
Is that Nike jacket the one for you, or is there something else?
I think there's a couple.
Okay.
That Nike's a big one. You know, I've had people reach out to me on like LinkedIn or whatever and say like, hey, I was a fan of Guard when you did it back then and like recently. So that's like,
dope.
That's really cool. You know, when I see Russell Wilson wear like something that I've designed on like the runway to go into the stadium or something like that, that's always cool. That's really dope. I think there's a really famous toy designer. His name is Michael Lau. And he has a series called the Gardner series. And if you're into like anime and like it's like he took a number of my designs at Nike and then miniaturized them into like his dolls. And his dolls, like on the aftermarket, if you go on eBay, they sell for like thousands and thousands of dollars. So for him to think, first of all, that the designs are cool enough to kind of like miniaturize into doll form, and then to see the detail where literally there's no detail missing. That was pretty cool. That was pretty dope. And I've seen like, you know, the other side is that like I've done concepts for people, haven't heard from them, and then I've seen the clothing out there, and for some big brands, to be honest, and I'll keep those names like private, but like some big brands, and it's kind of like that's part of the game. You kind of chuckle, and it's like, okay, I get it. So there's two sides to that.
Okay, fair. Out of those three roles that you worked in, like which do you enjoy the most? Like which kind of still brings a smile to your face?
I think that, you know, I really loved working at Nike because I was able to take a team and help bring some really incredible creativity out of them. You know, I love helping creatives, especially younger creatives that just get into the biz, helping them see their potential. That's just like a really like I get a lot of enjoyment out of that because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to like want to be part of this industry, to succeed, and I know what it takes to hustle through it. So to help younger designers see that path through, that's a big deal for me. Still to this day, like if like I get quite a few younger designers that are just coming out of college, hitting me up on LinkedIn, and I always take, even if it's like someone I don't know, because I know how it is, you know, and I think you know, it's just being nice in that way, it goes a long way. I saw this quote from, I don't know if it was the CEO of LVMH or I forgot who, but one of them. And they were talking about Virgil Abloh, and they said his superpower was his niceness. He was nice to everybody. He was engaging. He accepted people who normally in this fashion biz where it's super siloed and like it's kind of insular in a way, like, you know, like it's kind of like a club that certain people can't get into, especially at those higher levels. He was so engaging and accepting of people who he never even knew. So and I agree with that. Like I think that's a superpower to be able to impart your wisdom to people and to just be nice. What you get back from that will be immeasurable.
I agree 100%. And I think I've said this quote like before, but there's always like as I read it somewhere where it's like everybody like has a boss that, or most people have a boss that didn't realize that being nice to them, the effect that it had on their life.
Yes.
And it's like, do you want to be that boss? Because before, everyone's been hustled, everyone started out, everyone's been small at some point. Those of us that remember when we were that, like that karma, like always comes back around. Like you're absolutely 2 minutes to like be kind to somebody, right? Did you have a boss that like inspired you to kind of have this ethos?
Yep, my first really big boss at the Gap, her name is Jin Seo.
Okay.
She was my design director there. She's amazing. She just, I remember interviewing with her at first, and she came from really great background. She was she was out at Ralph Lauren. She was doing RLX, which was their like sport performance stuff. And so that was like, at the time, it was just, I remember just being obsessed with RLX because it was just pushing so many envelopes. So when I interviewed with her, she was just so nice, so engaged. She was like, I see the potential in you. It was like an emotional interview. I think I cried after. It was just crazy. Like it was nuts. It was disgusting. But like, she taught me so much, and she was so patient with me. And I'll never forget that. And a lot of the ways that I lead teams or just treat people in this biz are patterned after her. And you know, that was a really one of my other bosses there was Todd Snyder at the Gap. So just how, and to see where he is now, he's like this, like, you know, really big icon. But like, even then, he would just sit down with me and just work on tech packs with me. We would talk sports. He was just so cool. And I just realized like, this is how I want to treat other people. And it's not like I felt like I already had that mentality, but it was just confirmed by seeing these people who achieved so much in their career, and they're still like super cool.
Humble, right?
Yeah. So I think, but Jin was definitely like a huge part. So if Jin's watching, thank you so much. Yeah.
So what advice would you give younger designers to like have a career as illustrious and as varied, as extensive as yours? What advice would you give designers starting out today?
I would say that, you know, especially coming out of college, like really or design school, start somewhere where you can kind of understand the path you want to go on in the career, and stylistically. Firstly, if you want to work at Nike or Adidas or on Run, whatever, really like target those jobs and do whatever you can to, LinkedIn is such a tool. I mean, I swear to God, like I don't think they've changed their UI in decades, but it's still, to this day, it's still one of the most potent tools.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. So like really start to build a community of connections there. Designers don't like doing this. A lot of creatives don't like doing this. They don't like to, go out there and make all these connections and like kind of like, because they feel like it's like selling themselves. But you have to meet people. You have to tell them what you're into and what you want to do, and you have to put yourself out there on the radar so that your name rings when something happens, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to be in that world, like, so unfortunately, in this business, if you want to work at Louis Vuitton, let's say, and if you start off at Walmart, it's a hard push to get there. And that's with kind of any industry, to be honest. But like, in terms of like, brands that are grouped together and how, incestuous it is sometimes with employees, like go from different brands. But that's just kind of a thing. Which is why I counsel young designers to be as diverse as possible, so that you can be seen as someone that can be a problem solver, and to be an aesthetic problem solver for multiple types of brands, multiple types of categories. And it's to do it that way can be challenging, but you will be rewarded for it down the line if you just embrace the diversity of style, of aesthetic, of category, learn as much as possible. And when you get in someplace, this is something I always tell designers as well, if you get in someplace, really become friends with the merchants, the marketing team, learn the business side, because nothing is more detrimental to a designer than when they have to present an idea, a design to the rest of the world at the brand, at the other teams, and they're asked, well, why should we do this? And they say something like, well, it's cool, or it's trendy. Like there has to be a mix of like design and business.
Yeah. Okay, that's great advice. A lot of our community are students, like FIT persons. So that's really, really good advice. We're coming short of time, so I want to thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. I hope everyone that's watching enjoyed this as much as we did making it. So everybody, we release new episodes every Thursday. Listen to them on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and catch you on the next one.